I didn't think I'd be the kind of guy writing on here, let alone about something like this. But I need to get this out of my head because I feel like I'm losing it. My wife, Megan, and I have been married for 8 years. We met in college, fell hard, and got married young. For the most part, our marriage has been good, or so I thought. I'd be lying if I said everything was perfect. Over the past year or so, Megan had been distant. She'd pick fights over the dumbest things, roll her eyes when I talked about work, and spend more time on her phone than with me. But I told myself we were just in a rough patch. Every couple goes through it, right? Last month, I decided to book us a ski trip in Colorado. Megan loved skiing, and I thought some time away together might help us reconnect. She seemed excited when I told her about it, even giving me one of those rare, genuine smiles I hadn't seen in a while. "Good idea, Jake," she'd said, wrapping her arms around me. "We need this." I felt hopeful, like maybe this trip could be the reset button we needed. When we arrived at the resort, it was everything I'd hoped for: snow-capped mountains, cozy lodges, and stunning views. Megan was practically bouncing with excitement. She insisted we hit the slopes immediately, even though I wanted to settle into the room first. At the rental shop, Megan struck up a conversation with one of the ski instructors. His name was Ryan, and he was the kind of guy you'd expect to see on the cover of some outdoorsy magazine: tall, blonde, and annoyingly charismatic. "Are you guys signing up for lessons?" he asked, flashing a charming smile. "Oh, definitely," Megan said before I could respond. "I haven't been on the slopes in ages, and I could use a refresher." I wasn't thrilled about the idea of lessons. I've been skiing enough to hold my own, but Megan was insistent. "It'll be fun," she said, tugging on my arm. "Besides, Ryan seems great." Something about the way she said his name made my stomach twist, but I pushed the feeling aside. Over the next couple of days, Ryan seemed to pop up everywhere. He'd wave at Megan from across the lodge, offer her extra tips during lessons, and even joined us for drinks one evening. Megan didn't seem to mind, and at first I told myself it was harmless. But then I started noticing little things. The way Megan laughed a little too hard at his jokes, the way her eyes lit up when he walked into the room, the way she'd subtly adjust her hair whenever he was around. At first, I tried to brush it off. Megan was just being friendly. Ryan was just doing his job. But the nagging feeling in my gut wouldn't go away. I had no idea how much worse things were going to get. By the third day of the trip, I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that something was off. Megan was practically glued to Ryan during the lessons, hanging on his every word like he was some kind of skiing guru. She'd laugh at his jokes, even the dumb ones, and kept finding reasons to ask him for advice, even when she didn't need it. "Jake, I'm going to ride up on the cable car with Ryan," she said casually as we were about to head up one of the slopes. "He wants to give me some tips on my stance." I blinked at her. "Your stance? Didn't we go over that yesterday?" She rolled her eyes. "What's the big deal? You can ride up with the others." Before I could respond, she was already following Ryan to the cable car. I stood there, watching them laugh as they boarded together, feeling like an outsider on my own trip. That evening, I tried to bring it up. "You're spending a lot of time with Ryan," I said as we sat by the fireplace in the lodge. Megan didn't even look up from her phone. "Yeah, so? He's my instructor. That's literally his job. It just feels excessive," I said, trying to keep my tone neutral. She sighed heavily, setting her phone down. "Oh my God, Jake! Are you seriously jealous of Ryan? He's a ski instructor, not some secret lover. Grow up." Her words stung, but her tone stung even more. I felt like I'd been slapped. "It's not about jealousy," I said quietly. "It just feels like you're more interested in him than you are in me." She scoffed, grabbing her phone again. "Don't be ridiculous. You're imagining things." I wanted to believe her, but the way she dismissed my feelings only made my doubts grow stronger. The next morning, Megan woke up early and said she was heading to a private lesson with Ryan. Private lesson? I asked, raising an eyebrow. Yeah, she said breezily. He thinks I'll improve faster without the group distractions. You should do one too, it's worth it. I didn't have a good reason to say no, so I just nodded and watched her leave. But as soon as she was out the door, I grabbed my coat and followed. I told myself I was being paranoid, but I needed to know if my gut feeling was right. When I got to the slopes, I saw Megan and Ryan getting on the cable car together again. They were the only two in it, and I watched as the car slowly ascended the mountain. Through the glass, I could see Megan laughing, leaning toward Ryan as he said something. My chest tightened, a sick feeling rising in my stomach. I stayed at the base of the slope, waiting for them to come back down. When they finally did, Megan was glowing, her cheeks flushed, and she barely acknowledged me as she walked past. Great lesson, she said, brushing snow off her jacket. You should try it tomorrow. Ryan gave me a polite nod before heading off, but I caught the brief smirk he flashed Megan before he left. Something was definitely going on, and I was going to find out what it was. I couldn't focus on anything for the rest of the day. Megan's behavior, and the way she lit up around Ryan gnawed at me like a bad itch I couldn't scratch. I told myself I was being paranoid. Maybe she was just enjoying the lessons more than I expected. But deep down, I knew it wasn't that simple. That evening, Megan went to the lodge bar to grab drinks with some people from the group. She asked me to join her, but her tone made it clear she didn't actually care whether I came or not. I'm exhausted, I said, waving her off. You go ahead. She shrugged and left without a second thought. Once I was alone in the room, I couldn't stop replaying everything in my head, the way she laughed with Ryan, the way she leaned toward him on the cable car, and especially the way she dismissed me when I brought it up. I decided to do something I never thought I'd do. I grabbed her phone. Megan had never been overly protective of her phone, but she'd started keeping it closer than usual during this trip. Still, she wasn't careful enough to change her passcode. It was the same one we'd both used for years. What I found wasn't overtly incriminating, but it wasn't innocent either. Her messages with Ryan were short but flirtatious in tone. Ryan, you're a natural out there. Can't wait for our next session. Megan, flattery will get you everywhere. Another message from him. Make sure you're well rested for tomorrow. I've got a special route planned just for us. Her response. I'll be ready. Don't go easy on me. I stared at the screen, my hands trembling. While the texts weren't explicit, they had an undeniable undertone that sent my mind racing. I put the phone back exactly where I found it and sat on the edge of the bed, trying to steady my breathing. When Megan came back to the room, she was in an unusually good mood. Why didn't you come down? She asked, kicking off her boots. You missed a good time. Did Ryan join you guys? I asked, trying to sound casual. She shrugged, pulling her hair into a ponytail. Yeah, for a bit. Why? No reason, I said, watching her closely. She didn't even flinch, but her nonchalant attitude only made me more suspicious. The next morning, I decided to follow her to her private lesson. She left early, dressed in her favorite ski gear, humming to herself as she walked out the door. I waited a few minutes before grabbing my jacket and heading to the slopes. It didn't take long to spot her. She and Ryan were already on the cable car, alone again. This time, I didn't just watch. I got on the next car and followed them up the mountain. When I reached the top, I stayed out of sight, watching as they skied toward a secluded trail. They stopped halfway down, and I saw Ryan reach out to touch her arm, laughing. Megan leaned closer, her body language more than just friendly. I clenched my fists, my heart pounding. I wanted to confront them right then and there, but I held back. I needed more than suspicions, I needed undeniable proof. I couldn't get the image of them skiing off together out of my head. Megan leaning into Ryan, her laugh echoing in the crisp mountain air, it was burned into my mind. That night, I stayed quiet, watching Megan carefully. She acted like everything was normal, even going on about how much she'd improved under Ryan's instruction. Her voice was bright, her mood cheerful, but I couldn't stop hearing the flirtatious tone from their texts. When she mentioned another private lesson planned for the next day, I decided it was time to take action. The next morning, I got up early and followed her again, staying far enough back that she wouldn't notice me. She met Ryan at the base of the lift, and they exchanged smiles before getting on the cable car together. I hopped on the next car, keeping my distance but watching every movement. They were sitting close, talking, their heads leaning toward each other. Halfway up the mountain, the cable car slowed to a stop, routine for the lift, but it gave them plenty of time to sit there. From my angle, I couldn't see much through the frosted glass, but what I did see confirmed my worst fears. Ryan leaned in, and Megan didn't pull away. At the top of the lift, I skied quickly toward their usual spot, a more secluded trail Megan had mentioned once in passing. As I approached, I could see them stopped on the slope, standing close. Too close. Ryan had his hand on her waist, and Megan was laughing at something he said, her body leaning toward his. I didn't think. I didn't plan. I skied right up to them, my heart pounding in my chest. "What the hell is this?" I shouted, my voice echoing through the stillness of the mountains. Megan jumped, stepping away from Ryan like a guilty child caught stealing candy. "Jake! What are you doing here?" she stammered. "I could ask you the same thing," I said, glaring at both of them. "Care to explain why my wife is out here, alone, with her ski instructor, acting like this is some kind of date?" Ryan held up his hands, his expression calm but cautious. "Hey man, it's not what it looks like." I turned my anger toward him. "Don't you dare. I've seen enough to know exactly what this is." Megan finally spoke, her voice sharp. "You're being ridiculous, Jake. We were just talking." "Talking?" I snapped, pointing at them. "That's what you call this? Late nights, secret messages, sneaking off together? You think I'm stupid?" She crossed her arms, her face hardening. "You're overreacting. God, you always do this. Can I just have fun without you assuming the worst?" Her words hit me like a slap, but they didn't shake my resolve. "Fun?" I said, my voice trembling with anger. "This is your idea of fun? Cheating on your husband with some guy you've known for 3 days?" Megan scoffed. "You're blowing this way out of proportion. Nothing happened, Jake. You're just paranoid." I turned to Ryan, who was still standing there like he didn't know whether to stay or run. "Did nothing happen, Ryan?" I asked coldly. "Or are you just as much of a liar as she is?" Ryan hesitated, and in that moment I knew. Without another word, I turned and skied down the slope, leaving both of them behind. By the time I reached the base of the mountain, I was shaking, not from the cold, but from the surge of emotions coursing through me. Anger, humiliation, heartbreak. I could barely keep my thoughts straight. I didn't bother waiting for Megan to catch up. I went straight back to the hotel room, grabbed a beer from the minibar, and sat on the edge of the bed, trying to calm myself down. My mind raced, replaying the confrontation over and over. The look on her face when I caught them, the surprise, followed by that infuriating smugness, made my blood boil. Megan came back about an hour later, her cheeks flushed, her expression tense. She slammed the door behind her and tossed her gloves onto the dresser. "What the hell was that, Jake?" she demanded, glaring at me. I took a long sip of my beer before responding. "I should be the one asking you that question, don't you think?" "Oh, come on," she said, throwing her arms up. "You embarrassed me in front of Ryan. Do you have any idea how unhinged you looked?" "Unhinged?" I repeated, standing up. "Megan, I caught you practically throwing yourself at him. What do you expect me to do? Just stand there and smile?" She rolled her eyes, crossing her arms. "You're being dramatic. Nothing happened, Jake. We were just talking, like I said." I laughed bitterly. "Talking? Is that what you call leaning into him, letting him put his hands all over you? Because from where I was standing, it sure as hell didn't look like just talking. Her face flushed, and for a moment, I thought she might actually admit something. But instead, she doubled down. You're paranoid, she snapped. You've always been paranoid. Maybe if you trusted me instead of acting like a jealous maniac, we wouldn't be in this mess. Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. This mess? I repeated, my voice low. You're the one who created this mess, Megan. You're the one who lied to me, who sneaks off with another man, who flirts with him like I don't exist. How is this my fault? She didn't answer right away. Instead, she grabbed her coat and headed for the door. I'm not doing this with you, she said coldly. You need to calm down. With that, she walked out, leaving me standing there in stunned silence. I didn't know where she went, and for the first time, I didn't care. I spent the rest of the evening scrolling through my phone, searching for answers, for stories like mine, for anything that would make me feel less alone. That's how I ended up here, typing this out. I don't know what's next. I don't know if I can forgive her, or if I even want to. All I know is that the person I thought I married doesn't exist anymore, and I'm left trying to figure out what to do with the pieces. After Megan stormed out, I sat in the room for what felt like hours, staring at the wall and replaying every moment from the past few days. Her excuses, her defensiveness, the way she looked at Ryan, it all felt like one big, ugly lie. I couldn't let it go. I needed the truth, even if it destroyed me. The next morning, Megan came back to the room like nothing had happened. She was chipper, talking about how great the slopes were and how much she'd learned from the lessons. I waited until she finished her coffee before saying, Megan, we need to talk. She groaned, already rolling her eyes. Are we really doing this again? Jake, I told you, nothing happened. You're blowing this way out of proportion. I kept my tone calm. Then let me see your phone. That caught her off guard. She set her mug down a little too hard, spilling coffee onto the table. What? She asked, her voice tight. Your phone, I said, leaning back in my chair. If there's nothing to hide, then it shouldn't be a problem, right? Her face hardened. No. I'm not doing this. I'm not going to play these stupid games with you. It's not a game, Megan, I said, my patience wearing thin. If you want me to believe you, show me your phone. She stood up, grabbing her coat. I don't have to prove anything to you. This is your insecurity, not mine. When she left the room, slamming the door behind her, I decided to take matters into my own hands. I remembered that the resort had a concierge service that handled guest requests, including coordinating lessons and activities. I went down to the front desk and asked about the private lessons Megan had been booking. The concierge, a cheerful woman in her mid-30s, smiled at me. Of course. Let me pull up the details for you. She clicked away at her computer before glancing up. Looks like she's had 3 private sessions with Ryan so far. Right, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. And do you know where those lessons took place? Her brow furrowed slightly. Well, private lessons can be held anywhere on the mountain, but, oh, this is interesting. What is? I asked, leaning closer. It looks like for 2 of the sessions, they requested an off-trail area near the North Ridge. That's pretty unusual. Most private lessons stick to the marked trails. My stomach dropped. I thanked the concierge and went back to the room, my mind racing. Off-trail areas? Why would they go somewhere so secluded? When Megan returned later that afternoon, I didn't bother hiding my frustration. Were you at the North Ridge today? I asked, crossing my arms as she walked in. She froze for a split second before brushing snow off her jacket. What are you talking about? I spoke to the concierge, I said, watching her closely. She told me about your private lessons with Ryan, including the ones at the North Ridge. Her face flushed, and she dropped her gloves onto the bed. You're unbelievable, Jake. Snooping around like some paranoid freak? Do you even hear yourself? Don't turn this around on me, I snapped. Just answer the question. What were you doing out there? Learning how to ski, she said sarcastically. Isn't that the whole point of a ski lesson? Her deflection only made me angrier. Do you think I'm stupid? You've been sneaking around with Ryan, lying to my face, and now you expect me to believe you were just skiing? She glared at me, her jaw tight. Believe whatever you want, Jake. I'm done explaining myself to you. She walked into the bathroom and slammed the door, leaving me standing there, fists clenched, my mind spiraling. I didn't have the full truth yet, but I was getting closer, and I wasn't going to stop until I had all the answers. Megan's deflection only made me more determined to find out the truth. I wasn't going to let her gaslight me into thinking I was crazy, not when everything pointed to something happening behind my back. That night, while Megan was asleep, I decided to search for more evidence. It felt invasive and wrong, but at this point, I didn't care. She'd left me no choice. I started with her phone again, carefully taking it off the nightstand while she was sound asleep. The texts with Ryan were still there, but nothing stood out beyond the flirtatious tone I'd already seen. Then I checked her photos. Most of the images were innocent, selfies, pictures of the slopes, shots of us together. But as I scrolled further, I found a few that made my stomach drop. One photo was of Megan and Ryan standing at the top of the North Ridge, their heads close together, both of them smiling like they were on a romantic getaway. Another was taken inside what looked like a cabin or lodge I didn't recognize, with Megan holding a glass of wine and Ryan sitting next to her, his arm casually draped over the back of the couch. It was subtle, but the intimacy was undeniable. The next morning, I confronted her as soon as she woke up. "What the hell is this, Megan?" I asked, holding up her phone with the photos displayed. Her eyes widened for a split second before narrowing. "Were you going through my phone again? Jesus, Jake, you're obsessed. Don't try to turn this around on me," I said, my voice rising. "Explain these pictures. Where were you? And don't lie to me this time." She sat up, running a hand through her hair. "Those are just pictures, Jake. We were on the ridge, and the cabin was part of the lesson. It's not what you think." "Part of the lesson?" I repeated, incredulous. "You're telling me Ryan's job as a ski instructor involves taking you to secluded cabins and posing for cozy pictures? Do you hear how ridiculous that sounds?" Megan sighed heavily, swinging her legs over the side of the bed. "You're impossible. I can't even have a good time without you jumping to the worst conclusions." "This isn't a conclusion, Megan. This is evidence," I said, my voice shaking. "You've been sneaking around with him the whole trip. Admit it." She stood up, her face a mix of anger and guilt. "You don't know what you're talking about," she snapped. "Ryan and I are friends. That's it. But of course, you can't handle the idea of me having a life outside of you." Her words stung, but I didn't back down. "Friends don't act like this, Megan. Friends don't lie and sneak off to cabins. You've been cheating on me, haven't you?" For a moment, she looked like she was about to deny it again. But then her face hardened, and she crossed her arms. "So what if I was?" she said, her voice defiant. "You've been checked out of this marriage for years, Jake. Maybe if you paid more attention to me, I wouldn't have had to find someone who actually cares." Her confession hit me like a freight train. I felt the air leave my lungs as her words sank in. "You're unbelievable," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "You destroy our marriage, and now you're blaming me for it? Maybe if you weren't so suffocating, I wouldn't have needed a break," she said coldly. I couldn't listen to another word. I grabbed my jacket and stormed out of the room, slamming the door behind me. I spent the rest of the day wandering the resort, trying to process what had just happened. Megan had finally admitted it, but instead of remorse, she'd thrown it back in my face like it was my fault. As much as it hurt, her confession gave me the clarity I needed. Our marriage was over, and there was no going back. After Megan's confession, The weight of everything hit me like an avalanche. Our marriage, built on trust and memories, now felt like a hollow lie. I wandered the resort aimlessly, my thoughts racing. I thought about going to Chris, my best friend back home, for advice, but I wasn't ready to explain everything. The humiliation of it all made my stomach churn. Instead, I found myself sitting in the lounge, nursing a coffee and staring out at the slopes. I watched the skiers glide effortlessly down the mountain, laughing and carefree, while my life felt like it was falling apart. When I returned to the room later that evening, Megan was sitting on the bed, scrolling through her phone. She glanced up briefly when I walked in but didn't say a word. "I've booked a flight home for tomorrow," I said flatly, setting my bag on the floor. Her eyebrows shot up. "What? Why?" "Because I can't stay here with you," I said, my voice cold. "I can't look at you, Megan. Not after everything you've done." She sighed dramatically, tossing her phone onto the nightstand. "Oh, come on, Jake. Are you seriously going to ruin the rest of the trip over this? Grow up." "Ruin the trip?" I repeated, my voice rising. "You think I care about this trip? You ruined everything, Megan. Our marriage, our trust, our entire life together. And now you're acting like it's no big deal." She rolled her eyes, crossing her arms. "You're so dramatic. I told you the truth, didn't I? What more do you want from me? I wanted a wife who didn't lie to me," I said, my anger boiling over. "I wanted a wife who didn't cheat on me with some ski instructor while I was standing right there." Her face flushed with anger, but she didn't say anything. That night, I packed my bags, ignoring her as she muttered under her breath about me being overly sensitive and always looking for problems. I slept on the couch, though I barely got any rest. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her and Ryan together, laughing on the slopes, sneaking off to secluded cabins, and lying to my face over and over again. By morning, I felt like a shell of myself, but I was determined to leave. The drive to the airport was silent, tense, and suffocating. Megan sat in the passenger seat, scrolling through her phone as if nothing had happened. As I pulled up to the terminal, she finally spoke. "So, what happens now?" I turned to her, my jaw tight. "What happens now is that I go home, call a lawyer, and figure out how to move on without you." Her expression faltered for the first time, a flicker of uncertainty crossing her face. "Jake, are you serious? You're really going to throw everything away over one mistake?" "One mistake?" I said, laughing bitterly. "Megan, this wasn't a mistake. This was a choice. Over and over again, you chose to betray me, to lie to me, to disrespect me. And now you want me to just, what? Forget it ever happened?" She looked away, her lips pressed into a thin line. "You're not perfect either, Jake," she muttered. "I never claimed to be," I said firmly. "But I didn't destroy our marriage. You did." With that, I grabbed my bags, slammed the door, and walked into the airport without looking back. When I landed back home, everything felt surreal. The familiarity of the airport, the crisp winter air, it all felt like it belonged to someone else's life. My phone buzzed in my pocket, but I ignored it. I already knew it was Megan. I got into a cab and headed straight to my house. Walking through the door felt both comforting and suffocating at the same time. The house was ours, filled with memories that now felt tainted. After setting my bags down, I finally checked my phone. Sure enough, there were 3 missed calls and a long text from Megan. "Jake, I know you're hurt, but I hope you'll give me a chance to explain. I love you, and I don't want to lose everything we've built over one mistake. Please call me." One mistake. She kept using that phrase like it could somehow minimize everything she'd done. I tossed the phone onto the counter and grabbed a beer from the fridge, staring out the window as I tried to process everything. The next day, I called Chris. "Jake. Man, you're back early. How was the trip?" he asked, his voice cheerful. "It was a disaster," I said, my voice heavy. Chris immediately picked up on my tone. What happened? I hesitated, then sighed. Megan. She cheated on me. With some ski instructor. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Are you serious? Chris finally said, his voice low. Yeah, I replied, swallowing hard. I caught her in the act, Chris. And when I confronted her, she admitted it, blamed me even. Said I was checked out of the marriage. Unbelievable, Chris said, his anger palpable. You don't deserve that, man. She's out of her mind. I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. I don't know what to do, Chris. I've already told her it's over, but now she's texting me, trying to explain herself, asking for another chance. Don't fall for it, Chris said firmly. She made her choices, Jake. You've got to do what's best for you now. Megan called again later that evening, and this time, I picked up. What do you want, Megan? I asked, my voice cold. I want to talk, she said, her tone soft. I know I messed up, Jake, but I love you. I want to fix this. You don't get it, do you? I said, gripping the phone tightly. You didn't just mess up, you destroyed everything. How am I supposed to trust you after this? After everything you've done? I'll do whatever it takes, she said, her voice cracking. I'll go to counseling. I'll cut off all contact with Ryan, anything, Jake. Just give me a chance. Her desperation tugged at something deep inside me, but I quickly pushed it aside. I don't think there's anything left to fix, I said, my voice steady. You made your choice, Megan. Now I'm making mine. There was a long silence on the other end of the line before she finally whispered. I'm sorry, Jake. I really am. So am I said, ending the call. For the first time since the trip, I felt like I had taken control of the situation. It wasn't closure, not yet, but it was a step in the right direction. The days that followed were a blur of emails, phone calls, and paperwork. The first thing I did was contact a lawyer. I didn't know much about divorce proceedings, but I wanted someone in my corner who could guide me through the process. Karen, my lawyer, was direct and efficient. Jake, I'm sorry you're dealing with this, she said during our initial consultation. But the good news is, you're taking the right steps to protect yourself. Let's talk about what you want out of this. I just want a clean break, I said. No fighting over the house, no drama. I just want to move on. She nodded. Fair enough. But don't give up more than you need to out of frustration. It's important to protect your interests long term. Meanwhile, Megan's messages kept coming. At first, they were apologetic, filled with promises to change and pleas for another chance. Jake, please don't give up on us. We can fix this. I know I hurt you, but I'll do whatever it takes to make it right. When I didn't respond, her tone shifted. I can't believe you're being this stubborn. I made one mistake, and you're throwing everything away. Fine. If this is what you want, then don't expect me to wait around for you to change your mind. Her deflections and attempts to guilt me only solidified my resolve. One afternoon, while sorting through some paperwork, I came across our wedding album. The sight of it stopped me cold. I flipped through the pages slowly, staring at the smiling faces frozen in time. The photos felt like a cruel joke now, a reminder of the life I thought we had. For a moment, I considered throwing the album away, but something held me back. Instead, I closed it and placed it in a box labeled Memories. It wasn't something I wanted to look at again anytime soon, but I couldn't bring myself to destroy it either. Chris came over that evening to check in on me. He brought a 6-pack of beer and his usual no-nonsense attitude. How's it going? He asked, settling onto the couch. It's a process, I said, running a hand through my hair. He cracked open a beer and handed it to me. Look, man, I know this sucks. But you're doing the right thing. Megan showed you who she is, and now you're taking control. That's more than a lot of people can say. I nodded, appreciating his support. You'll get through this, Chris continued. And when you do, you'll be better off without her. Trust me. That night, as I sat alone in the quiet house, I realized Chris was right. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew one thing for certain. I was done being someone's second choice. This was the beginning of a new chapter, and it was up to me to write it. The reality of the divorce started to sink in over the following weeks. Even though Megan and I weren't officially separated yet, it felt like she was already gone. The house, which once felt warm and full of life, now seemed cold and hollow. Most of her things were still here, clothes in the closet, pictures on the walls, but they felt like artifacts of a life that didn't belong to me anymore. I avoided the bedroom as much as possible, sleeping on the couch most nights. Megan's attempts to contact me became less frequent, but when she did reach out, her tone was all over the place. One day, I'd get a long, heartfelt message about how much she regretted her actions and how deeply she loved me. "Jake, I can't stop thinking about us. Please don't give up on what we had. I know I messed up, but I'll do whatever it takes to fix this." The next day, she'd send something bitter and defensive. "You've always been stubborn, Jake. You're just looking for an excuse to walk away. Don't act like you were some perfect husband." It was exhausting, and I stopped replying altogether. I kept busy by throwing myself into work and leaning on Chris whenever things felt too heavy to handle alone. He became my go-to support system, always ready with blunt advice and a beer when I needed it. "Don't let her get into your head," he said one night when I showed him one of her messages. "She's trying to control the narrative because she knows she's the bad guy in this story. Don't let her rewrite it." He was right, but it was easier said than done. One weekend, while clearing out some of Megan's things, I came across a small notebook tucked into her nightstand. I knew I shouldn't look inside. It felt invasive, like crossing a boundary that no longer mattered. But curiosity got the better of me. Most of the entries were harmless: shopping lists, reminders, notes about work. But then I found a page that stopped me cold. It was a list of dates, each one accompanied by a brief note. December 12th. Ryan, Ridge. December 14th. Ryan, Lodge Cabin. December 16th. Private, R. My hands trembled as I read the entries. It wasn't explicit, but the pattern was clear. These weren't innocent skiing sessions. They were meetings, planned and deliberate. The betrayal felt fresh all over again, like ripping open a wound that had barely started to heal. That night I called Karen. "I want to move forward with everything," I told her. "Whatever it takes to finalize this, let's do it." "Understood," she said. "We'll start the process immediately." Hanging up that call felt like a weight had been lifted. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt like I was taking control of my life again. Once I decided to move forward with the divorce, things began to feel a little clearer. The weight of indecision, the what-ifs, the anger, and the endless second-guessing started to fade. Now, it was about logistics and reclaiming my life. Karen moved quickly, drafting the paperwork and explaining what the process would look like. Megan and I didn't have kids, which simplified things. But dividing assets, particularly the house, would take some work. "Jake, you're in a good position here," Karen assured me during one of our calls. "Just stay patient, and don't give in to any emotional manipulation." Megan's reaction to receiving the divorce papers was predictable. She called almost immediately, her voice frantic and defensive. "Jake, are you serious? Divorce? You're really going through with this?" "Yes, Megan," I said firmly. "You made your choices. Now I'm making mine." "You're overreacting," she snapped. "This doesn't have to end like this. We can work through it." "There's nothing to work through," I said, my tone ice cold. "You destroyed what we had, Megan. It's over." Her voice broke slightly. "You're making a mistake. You'll see that one day." "No," I said calmly. "The only mistake I made was trusting you." I hung up before she could respond. With each passing day, I focused more on rebuilding my life. I started going to the gym again, Not just to stay busy but to feel like I was doing something positive for myself. I signed up for a few weekend hiking trips with Chris, and for the first time in years, I started to feel like I was reconnecting with the person I used to be before everything revolved around Megan. One evening, Chris and I sat on his porch, sipping beers and watching the sunset. "You seem lighter," he said, glancing over at me. "I feel lighter," I admitted. "It's like I'm finally letting go of all the crap I've been holding on to." He grinned. "That's what I'm talking about. It's about time, man." I laughed, feeling something I hadn't felt in a while, genuine happiness. Megan's attempts to reach out became less frequent as the weeks went on. Occasionally I'd get a message or a missed call, but I didn't respond. I was done with her excuses, her guilt-tripping, and her endless justifications. The person I thought she was didn't exist, and I was finally starting to accept that. The divorce process wasn't easy, but it was worth it. Each step brought me closer to closing the door on that chapter of my life. By the time everything was finalized, I felt like I could finally breathe again. The house, the memories, the heartbreak, it was all behind me now. And for the first time, I wasn't just surviving. I was moving forward. Chris, of course, was thrilled when I told him about the list. "About time," he said, clapping me on the back. "You've been living for other people for too long, man. It's your turn now." We celebrated with a hike that weekend, one of the longer trails we'd been meaning to tackle for months. At the summit, as we stood looking out over the valley below, Chris handed me a water bottle and grinned. "How does it feel?" he asked. "To be free?" I said, laughing. "Feels damn good." Over the next few weeks, I started ticking items off the list. I signed up for a cooking class, where I learned how to make homemade pasta. I bought a second-hand camera and spent afternoons wandering through the city, capturing everything from sunsets to bustling streets. Each step felt like reclaiming a piece of myself, like I was finally becoming the person I was always meant to be. Megan popped into my head less and less as time went on. When I did think of her, it wasn't with anger or sadness anymore. It was more like remembering a distant dream. I didn't regret the years we spent together. They shaped me, taught me lessons I wouldn't have learned otherwise. But I didn't need her anymore, and that realization was the most freeing of all. As the weeks passed, life began to feel like mine again. The house, once filled with the shadows of my marriage, had transformed into a space that reflected who I was now. The emptiness wasn't oppressive anymore, it was peaceful. I spent more time outdoors, rediscovering hobbies I'd long forgotten. Hiking trails I used to love, finding new corners of the city to explore, even just sitting at a cafe and watching the world go by. It all felt new, like I was seeing life through a lens I hadn't looked through in years. One afternoon, Chris and I grabbed lunch at a small diner downtown. He was in his usual sarcastic mood, cracking jokes about how I was finally acting like a functional adult. "You look better," he said between bites of his burger. "Better how?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. "Lighter," he said, gesturing vaguely. "Like you're not carrying the weight of the world on your shoulders anymore." I shrugged, though I knew he was right. "I think I just stopped caring about things that don't matter anymore." "Good," he said with a nod. "About time." I laughed, the sound surprising me with how natural it felt. It wasn't forced or polite, it was real. That night, as I sat on the porch with a drink in hand, I realized something. I was happy. Not overwhelmingly so, not in a way that demanded celebration, but in a quiet, steady way. For so long, I'd been focused on the pain, the betrayal, the anger. But now, those feelings felt like they belonged to someone else. The man who sat here now wasn't the same person who had walked out of that hotel room, broken and lost. He was someone stronger, someone who had faced the worst and come out on the other side. Megan hadn't crossed my mind in days, and when she finally did, it was fleeting. I thought about her smile when we first met, the way she used to laugh at my dumb jokes. It wasn't painful anymore, just a memory of a life that no longer existed. I didn't need closure from her, didn't need apologies or explanations. I'd found my own closure in the act of letting go. Life wasn't perfect, but it was mine. And for the first time in a long time, that was enough. The day I finalized the divorce was supposed to feel like the end of something, but now it felt more like the beginning. Life had shifted so much in the months since that confrontation on the slopes, and I no longer felt defined by what had happened. The wounds Megan left behind didn't sting anymore. Instead, they'd scarred over, a reminder of lessons learned and a strength I didn't know I had. One Saturday morning, I found myself back on the same hiking trail I'd visited right after the divorce process started. This time, I wasn't trudging up the path with my mind clouded by anger and grief. The climb felt easier, my pace steady, my thoughts clear. At the summit, the same view stretched out before me, but it felt different. The air seemed fresher, the colors brighter. I stood there for a long time, just breathing it all in. When I got back home, I found a letter from Megan in the mailbox. I hesitated before opening it, debating whether it was worth reading at all. But curiosity won out, and I unfolded the page carefully. It was a short, handwritten apology. Jake, I've thought a lot about what happened and what I put you through. I know I hurt you in ways that can't be undone, and I'll never stop regretting that. I hope one day you'll be able to forgive me, not for my sake, but for yours. I'm truly sorry. Megan. I set the letter down and stared at it for a moment. There was no anger, no sadness, just a quiet acceptance. I didn't need her apology to move on, but it felt like the final piece of closure I hadn't realized I wanted. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, I sat on the porch with Max, my new rescue dog, curled up at my feet. The world felt calm, and for the first time in what felt like forever, so did I. This wasn't the life I'd planned, but it was mine now. A life built on strength, resilience, and the promise of better days ahead. And as I watched the stars blink into the night sky, I smiled, because for the first time in a long time, I was ready to start again.